Hi, everybody. This is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal. We're about to start our next SEJ marketing think tank with our special partners, Scribble Live. So we have with us Chris Hart today and also Christoph Trapp. Can you both say hi real quick?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
And they're going to be going over the ways that successful companies can combine SEO and content for larger wins. But before the Scribble Live team gets started, I'm going to go ahead and do some basic housekeeping to get everyone ready for our incredible webinar they're about to bring to us. So first off, thanks for joining. The official hashtag for today's webinar with Scribble Live is hashtag SEJ Think Tank. So if you want to like show off to any of your friends on Twitter or whatever, or try to make this trend, go ahead, take a screenshot or whatnot and drop a hashtag SEJ Think Tank. Also, just to let you know, during the webinar itself, we'll be having 3 polls. So those will pop up on your screen to give you a chance to participate accordingly to help Chris and Christoph craft their presentation and get ready for your future questions. Speaking of questions, I'll let you know also after they're finished with their presentation, which should take about 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a pretty in-depth Q&A session. So as questions come up, feel free to drop them into the question box, which is on your GoToWebinar control panel. We won't be answering live, but when we start the Q&A, which will be at the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and start addressing those questions and answering and adding to the topic matter that you write in. Also, just as a little preview, this webinar is going to get better and better and more involved from a visual perspective as the slides go on. So feel free to be shocked once we get to the end in a good way. So from there, I'm going to hand it off to you two, Chris and Christoph from Scribble Live. Feel free to get going.
Thanks, Lauren. I love that we're about to shock an audience of people.
Content shock.
Content shock. Give content a chance. So, quick agenda, introductions, then we're going to go into market opportunity, and what Lauren was discussing with the shocking will happen will be during the use case discussions. My name is Christopher Hart. I'm the head of client development at LinkedX for Scribble Live.
Christoph Trapp here, VP of Content Marketing Strategy at Scribble. I just want to clarify, did he just say that the first slide, the one that has both of us on it, is actually the worst looking slide? Unbelievable. But we'll go from here. Uphill from here, Chris. Let's get going, right?
Exactly. Our headshots are the negative portions of the presentation.
I had a bad hair day. Let's get going. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. So, poll question 1.
Awesome. Let's get it rolling. So, first off, what best describes your role in your organization and your organization's marketing operations? So, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And if you can take a moment just to answer really quickly. 1, overall marketing strategy. So, are you in charge of everything omni-channel? 2, SEO, 3, content strategy and production, or 4, other. So if this does not describe anything that you do, please feel free to click other. So typically we try to get about 80 to 90% votes coming in. We're at 75% right now, pretty easy question to answer. So let's give everybody a chance, final chance, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. All right, so sharing the results. We have 83% of you have voted. It looks like for the most part, 34% look at overall marketing strategy, and that describes your role in your current organization's marketing operation, followed by SEO and content strategy production 5, and then a lower percent fall into the other category. So what do you all think about that?
That's a really good mix. I'm just glad we didn't have 80% other, because what would that have been? But a great mix, right? For the topic of our webinar, how do we break down silos across all those different disciplines?
Yeah, it makes me feel comfortable we're with the correct people, right? Which is why I'm going to jump on in here and give us the quick intro into the. We live in the customer-driven world. It's obvious these days that our users are in clear control of their destiny, and the linear path in which prior marketing activities existed doesn't exist anymore.
You know, Chris, the one thing that comes to my mind is always there's so many different channels, right? I mean, especially for content here. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, like in the early 90s, there was one magazine to cover this whole topic. And today you can get the same content or similar content on all these different channels. So we'll talk about how do we make that easier for your organization to create those bigger wins.
Exactly. And in this process, the journey is a challenge. It's changing. People might be moving along in one direction, suddenly, go in a different way, get pinged by some social channel. So there's no only way in which you could access your audience.
That's right. The journey is no longer linear, if it ever was. So we got to adjust for that, obviously.
And it's very complicated. I mean, you look at, as I love that we have some German newspapers in our slides, showing you how complicated just in general it is to maybe even understand what people are talking about, right? I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to get information out there, and how do you, the end user, discern what's valuable, right?
That's right. Yep. And content plays a big part in that, of course, especially the content, that people are looking for. I don't know the latest number, Chris, but what is it? 15% of Google searches per day have never been searched before. So there's still a huge market for a lot of that content out there.
Lots of long tail searches happen every day, right? And
that is true.
We have the evolution of our customer driven communication. And Christoph, as you talked earlier there, at one time there was just one place you would go for information, right? You had your general broadcast media, and then potentially trade publications, right? I remember I bought my first computer through that big fat giant computer shopper book back in the day. Now you get your computer in 2 seconds. I ordered my last one with my cell phone, right? And then we had the internet, and suddenly, as you talked about, no longer do we just have the one place you go. Information is coming from a great many places, right? Following that, the evolution of mobile and social. So suddenly the individual out there is now getting a great many sources of information, but they're also realizing there's a much larger audience that they have equal voice and communications with, which brings us to the content experience today, right?
And of course, the content experience, of course, it has to be great across all these different channels, right? So wherever our customers are, that's where we need to be. And the one thing I keep hearing over and over, people still make decisions based on how they use content, right? And of course, we are not necessarily the target audience, right? I don't act like my 9-year-old for the most part, but she already uses content very differently than I do. Hopefully our slides are getting better and better, and we'll jump right in here. How do your teams actually do that? How do we break down the silos?
Right.
And I can say this, Chris, I'm based in Iowa. Silos are only good in Iowa on the farm, right? So of course, the content experience will help you do better marketing, right? So the more relevant your content, the more it's hitting people at the right time. When it matters to them, the better it is for your organization as a whole.
Exactly, because at this particular point, you're looking at 71% of buyers start in search engines, and just looking at B2B in this sense, you've got 5 different stakeholders. So what do you've got? You've got at least 5 different types of voices and narratives in which you have to generate content for across the different channels that each of those profiles participate in.
And how often does it happen, right, that you have those 5 stakeholders? You might get to talk to 2 or 3, if you're lucky, 4. And how do you influence these other stakeholders that you don't even see? First of all, through the people you're talking to, but also through the content that you're sharing online, right? So it's more and more important to actually do that. And of course, when you do that, you have to be data-driven, strategic, relevant, engaging. and on every channel that is relevant. That's one question I hear over and over. Should we even do social media? Is email dead? No, it's not, right? I mean, as we know, it's not dead.
Email is still a hugely profitable channel that it amazes me so many people miss the opportunity to engage with their audience at that point, right? Which brings us to our reality, right? We are in the fourth dimension, right, of competition, differentiating yourself through the types of content in which you could broadcast out to your audience, your users at different times. What content can you put in front of them when they need it and how they need it? Not just what you think you're about or what you want to say. It's all about the user, because it takes us directly into this kind of journey, right? Where you have the opportunity to trigger all these different kinds of informations which cause a person to think about something, consideration, evaluation, purchase. Look at all the different kinds of content that people go through in that big cycle. And then once they are a member of your community, you have this opportunity of the loyalty loop to keep them engaged in that.
And you know, the one thing I just want to, we've seen all these different graphics, right? It used to be linear, and it never really was linear to begin with. Now we have a circle, but one thing to keep in mind, it is closer to a circle than it is to a linear process. But people dip in and out, right? They see your content, they might be reading that, they see it on social, they might see it email, they might be searching for something. But this is one reason why it's so important to actually show up and search, because people are looking for something specifically. They're not just strolling through their Twitter feed, and you know, they have no intent to even do anything other than just look for what people are talking about on it.
Agree. Which brings us to the section of the presentation that Lauren alluded to, the high shock value set of slides, where we're going to talk about breaking down silos, monetizing audience, user engagement, and a better way of creating content. But right before that, we're going to go to our second poll question.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the next part. But before we get there, launching the poll right now, do your SEO and content teams currently collaborate? So please take, oh man, you guys have, people are just filling this up so quickly. It's crazy. So we're at 60% already. I want to get 80% again to make sure we can have some great data to share with you all. What were you going to say, Mr. Hart?
No, I said, wow, that's fast. That's fast polling.
That's incredibly fast polling. So we're at 75%. Give everybody a final chance. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, final chance. I'm gonna close the poll right now. 1, and sharing the results. So what do you think here? It looks like most teams are currently working together.
That's huge, huge.
It is huge. I would have loved to have taken the same poll about 5 years ago. And what's the results there? So I'll hand it back over to you guys.
Cool. Which brings us right into the breaking down silos, right? Where typically your employees, your greatest asset, and these people exist in different teams, and in some areas they may or may not have little collections of fiefdoms of data stored in certain areas, and they try to individually push these out across certain channels. And this disconnected, disorganized set of structures leads to low return, low value, low insight, right? But the reality is, do away with the thought of individual marketing channels being the thought process here. Collaborate across these teams to take the expertise that each individual has, you know, break down that tribal knowledge and apply it across multiple disciplines.
Right, and the key message really is here, not that we have fewer teams necessarily. We totally understand, and one of the reasons Chris and I work so well together, because you know, I'm a content creator, Chris is an SEO guy, and I can't even do what he does. I mean, when Chris shows me how he figures out how to do SEO, right, the blank stare comes out, and I'd like to go back over here and tell a story instead. So it's not about having fewer people, but it's about how do we collaborate? How do we pull in on each other's strengths? And when do we talk at the right time? And sometimes we still need to have in-person meeting or on the phone or Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever, but also use the right systems where people can see what's being worked on. And how do we actually show that to each other and not duplicate efforts, or totally ignore the other discipline.
Right. There's plenty of times people go, I just found out about that. I have all this information. I could have contributed to a thing. Why didn't anybody ask me? Well, that's because certain people were in the planning stages, didn't do that consideration, and we're stuck on channel, not stuck on communication.
That's right. Yep. Very common still.
Right. And this brings us down to building and monetizing audiences through content. Here, how many people have an existence like this? A content team shares or may not even share content through some level of disorganized spreadsheets or Google Docs, right? And you might have to do this internally across some agency or freelance of terms, right? And then suddenly you've got the data coming back and it's disconnected across teams that then have to push this out to an audience, and it may make it, may not make it. You know, there might be gates in the way, people might not be pushing, and the end user is left with a very, very confusing experience, right? They're disenfranchised at a number of ways.
Absolutely, and this will become more and more important. I mean, I know we hear people talk about you don't have to create more content, you have to just create better content. And if you look at all the experts out there, some of them who say this, they're not creating less content, right? But they're creating content constantly and with a strategy in mind. So as long as we do that and make sure everybody is aligned, you can't have multiple people participate in that process.
Exactly. And it looks something like this, where you start with the data insights we're always looking to get, and you inform your content team, which has the knowledge on how to use that, developing a workflow and a brief, right? And implementing that across the different kinds of content pieces, coming together. I mean, look at today, right? We got together, decided on a topic for our webinar. We put together slides, discussed what it was going to be about. We set a date. Information went out through email blasts. SEJ did stuff. LinkedX did stuff. Scruple Live did stuff. Information was then pushed out through emails. There was social sharing. We're now doing a webinar that's being recorded. That webinar is then going to be distributed as follow-up. There's then going to be opportunity to communicate to people at a later date. What have you just done? You've created a series of things around content, around an initiative, and you've distributed across a great many channels collaboratively.
And you know, this is also where it leads you to actually use the create once, publish everywhere model, right? Also known as COPE. So you create content one time, you atomize it, hack it up, whatever term you want to use, and you use it across all the different channels. And that really only works when you actually work together. And then more importantly too, perhaps, is working with the SEO strategists to actually figure out what are the terms to use, what are people searching for, should we cover another topic? You know, one of my predictions for next year is that people will actually do more content creation on what we're predicting to take off. So not just what are people searching for yesterday, but what are people predicting to take off soon. So that's like another level of SEO strategy. And then of course we see what's working and what's not working, and we can adjust with that. And the only way you can adjust content is when you actually are publishing content, right? And that's just really the only way to do it.
Right, and similar to your statement earlier about me doing SEO, when we started doing this, I immediately used tools to try to figure out what pages across our sites ranked well for the appropriate terms, and was like, we got a link here, find these pages, here's the keywords, you know, integrate this, and we got to write an article. And I started going down this spider hole of writing a very technical article. Chris settled me down, and next thing you know, we're writing a very nice promotional article about the communication and collaboration between the two of us to get to a thing that was received much nicer than me writing a highly technical SEO article around how we, you know, what this topic was going to be about.
But see, the key takeaway there for me is it's a mix, right? So it's like you don't want that, but then you also don't want me just going out and saying, hey, here's a good story, let's just publish it, right? So you do want to have a good mix of good storytelling, good unique angles, and then also what are people actually searching for? What are the terms that they use?
Right. And that's where we ended up with understanding how our sales, demand gen teams, and marketing and events got together. Many times there is this spreadsheets, and then you're disconnected over different kinds of work groups, work teams, trying to find an event, to a date, share it. and then you got the audience. They're either there or they're not there. But then what happens afterwards? What's the follow up? How do you continue that engagement with your audience in a captivating way to take it past just that you showed up at a thing? Well, now you're part of the thing, right? You want to be tied to a membership, right?
You know, and quite honestly, Chris, we need to have a goal for the next year: fewer spreadsheets in our PowerPoints. And I mean, we've used spreadsheets for how many years? Probably 15 years, maybe longer, right? And it's a nice tool, but it's really hard to track that centralized strategy, and especially if we don't even have the centralized strategy. So, but we need that in one place and make sure that we actually know what we're doing. Who are we trying to go after? What's our unique value, especially over our competitors? And then how do we create that experience for the end user? Because everything really needs to be about the end user in digital marketing and content marketing. And when we do that well, it pays back to the organization, of course.
Just like this script, just like this set of slides right here, where it wasn't the individual teams that were dictating a thing. It was the data and insights in which we wanted to achieve that allowed the collaboration of the teams to come together to work through a strategy and a workflow, right? To get the content teams out of looking at, like you said, spreadsheets and into, I mean, content people don't want to look at spreadsheets, right? I mean, I'm an SEO guy. I like looking at spreadsheets. I like data. I'd rather look at data than a chart, right? But content people don't want to look at spreadsheets, right? There, it's a tone, voice, intent, messaging, right? How does that feed into what they want to do? And you do that right, you communicate with the largest amount of potential audience, make the event the strongest event it possibly can, and then you have massively powerful follow-up to your audience. Empowering your audience pre, during, and post anything you do is the greatest way to want your audience to stay with you for the longest amount of time.
And the audience will not care if it's relevant communication, right? They will only care, they will only get annoyed when it's overly promotional, it's always too pushy. Yeah. But if it's relevant, they will care. And the one thing I want to just clarify here, when I say collaboration, Chris, you can chime in if you agree or disagree. But when I say collaboration, I don't mean that everybody now gets to approve everything, right? I mean that we're drawing on the different strengths of people. So one of the concepts that I like to use with teams is we don't edit for preference, right? Changing words because I like a word better than Chris, it's a waste of everybody's time. What we edit for is SEO or usability, right? So if somebody writes a certain way on a website and it doesn't work for SEO or it doesn't work for how people actually read online, change it, but don't just change something because Chris doesn't like a certain word or something.
And Lord knows I dislike a lot of words, but I agree. I agree with you 100%, right? You sacrifice some micromanaging controls for the bigger initiative, but you always do it with the goal of bigger, better audience engagement.
Right.
Which brings us into the better way of creating content. And in the old way, we talked about this, internal teams, creative plan productions, and sometimes you use agencies, and this gives you spend some money to gain a little bit of time, but you lose a little control over stuff. And the reality is, if you use the content experience platform where you could create and develop and create processes and produce content in a strategic way, manage spend, and engage the specialized talents across your enterprise, you're going to get a much greater return instead of just trying to offset for efficiency because you're stuck with, I need an agency or I don't have skill sets. It's really good planning process, right?
And especially in this work, Chris, it's interesting to see what does efficiency mean anyway. If I can write a crappy article quicker, that might be more efficient technically. But if it doesn't lead to anything, if nobody can find the thing, right, because it's not a good article, it's not useful anyway. So it does come back to that talent management. It does come back to the workflow. It also comes back to the right software, right? Use only the software that actually helps you. And then, of course, align your strength towards what you can do. and don't. Yeah, I hear that still quite often. How fast can you do things? Because
Right.
we're just creating widgets. Of course, that's not the reality of digital marketing, quite frankly.
Right, and a real life case is when I was in-house SEO in a publishing company. The writers were like, I'm creating all this content, and look how much content I'm creating and publishing. And I did a quick little analysis, and I figured out which writers' articles were generating the most ad impressions. And I went to them and said, if you did this with a little bit of SEO input, you change that. And some took me up on it, and some, naysayed and poo-pooed me. I worked with the ones that liked it, and then I went to management and said, you've got a much greater return for not necessarily having piles of content, but you've got really good, great content in quantity, and these people are doing it this way, and they're generating more ad impressions, which is generating the most amount of revenue, and you're not paying for this volume of content that's not helping the cause. In fact, this extra massive content that's suddenly flowing onto the website is actually causing damage. And
Right.
needless to say, that damage was just, from a search engine POV, but the audience didn't really appreciate it. They were like, I didn't like that. So needless to say, some people became more successful, and other people had to learn to do things just a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which brings us to our third poll question.
Absolutely. Thanks, gentlemen. So the third poll question is pretty simple. Are you interested in learning more about the tools that Scribble Live uses to help brands and agencies with SEO and content? So please select one of the following. Yes or no. Are you interested in hearing a little bit more and learning a little bit more about the tools that Chris and Christoph use behind the scenes to help brands and agencies with content? So about 60% of you have voted, filled this out already. Simple yes or no, so please take some time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, this is your final chance. It looks like a lot of the folks out there are interested in learning a little bit more. So that's fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and hide the results right now. Go back to your screen.
There we go. That's encouraging. And one thing I thank you, Lauren, for mentioning Scribble Live there. I mean, I'm going to note something that Christoph brought up. We tried really hard, aside from putting the logo in the corner. We didn't load our presentation up with product screenshots and stuff. We really wanted to stay focused on how to work with the situations in which our audience could potentially engage with, right? We tried really to stay focused on that conversation and that product sales stuff.
Well, let me go ahead and start that conversation then, because just to give everybody a little bit of insight, Scribble Live recently acquired and integrated LinkDex into the mix. And anybody that's on the call right now that does anything in terms of graphics or slides may know about the brand Visually, or the site Visually, which is probably the most popular infographic directory and also group of infographic designers out there, which is also part of Scribble Live. So they have a lot of tools, services, and also destinations underneath their belts, and it's a pretty awesome set. So I'm looking forward to learning more about you guys and how everything works together. And this has been a great presentation, so thank you. We're going to go ahead and open things up to Q&A right now. First question would be, let's see here. Going back to the second poll I think we did with SEO and do SEO and content teams work together? The first question is, should social media and content be run by the same team? Should they be communicating, managed with the same goals? How do you feel about that?
Well, that's really two questions, right? Because should they be on the same team? They don't have to necessarily, in my opinion, but they do need to collaborate, right? Especially in the create once, publish everywhere model. you have to work with the content team, because the content team in theory is actually creating the content that's going to be used and create once published everywhere. And then the social team, you know, certainly will schedule it, certainly will measure things, respond to people when they have questions. So they certainly need to have a certain level of collaboration for sure.
Yeah, I tend to fall into the camp of collaboration. We run into that a lot where social teams have something scheduled and planned, or our marketing teams, our email blasts have something scheduled or planned, right? And if they aren't talking to each other, they could potentially step on each other, or actually do have negative impact with each other as opposed to being positive. A recent case that comes to mind is we all know about what just happened in Las Vegas, and there was a casino that right after the shooting sent out an email blast and socialized it, but it was come to our casino with things around graveyards and stuff like that, and it went over really, really bad. They weren't talking well with their PR company, you know, with their PR teams, and the email team who had this designed and set up and ready to go and scheduled wasn't listening to the sentiment of the audience in which the social teams were plugged into, and they did some significant damage to their brand during those couple of weeks, and they're paying for it now.
The biggest problem, if they don't report up through the same person or the same structure, is when the leaders, whoever that might be, have different goals. So that is really that's really one of the advantages, to have it report to the same person, because then there's no goal confusion, because they can work against each other, right? Or if the two leaders don't get along. So that would be the only reason I would argue to have them be on one team.
Yeah, and that's usually a company problem, right? Where individuals are bonused or rewarded at different KPIs level, rather than the HR structure or the rewarding being done at a much higher level, in the sense of this joint KPI value rather than a singular version.
Right.
Yep. Very good point, because what happens, especially in social media, is social network oriented engagement is a success KPI, which is the KPI and behavior within the social network. So, example, there was a major retailer I was working with a couple of years ago, where we were putting together content for the blog with the intent of attracting links and traffic to the blog and to the site. Well, they had 15 million plus Facebook fans. And I brought up the very basic idea, hey, why don't we share this on Facebook in front of your 15 million fans and get them to engage? Well, we could do that, but it has to be a photo of the content, and then we'll talk about it, because our goal on social, well, first of all, the SEO teams and the social never talked beforehand. So I got them all on the phone, and they said that, yeah, but we can't link over to the site because we have to keep those users engaged and commenting on Facebook. And my point was, well, first of all, that's happening within a walled garden. And secondly, there's no bridge over to the content component of the site for them to, first of all, be introduced to your blog, be introduced to your content and storytelling, be introduced to your cookies, and things like that. Right. And being given the option to take a transactional route once they hit the site, or to be retargeted with an ad that supports the content that was served as well. So I think that it's kind of changing over time, especially since boosted content on Facebook is becoming more important and things like that. But
right.
Point, making sure those KPIs have some, even if you're not reporting to the same person, have some common ground. And sometimes it's the job of the agency to come in, that third party, and say, hey guys, all of you, can we all get at the table and talk about how this can help you? Not necessarily how we can leverage social media to help SEO, but how it can all work together at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is too, you know, what's the current best practice? And I always say, I'll do the best practice as long as it works. I'll give you an example on Twitter. So you know how everybody, or a lot of people keep saying, social media, share photos, better engagement, blah, blah, blah. So what people do is they share a photo on Twitter with a link, right, to wherever they want people to go, because somebody wants the engagement. And they do get the engagement because you know what people do, and you guys can check your own stats if this is the case in your organization. They click on that photo because they think the photo is the link. So the photo has all these clicks, which are totally useless, and nobody's clicking the link because they thought the photo is the link, and then they give up. So something to think about how you have to adjust with user behavior.
So I'll give you a part two of that story, which branches into the question, is that, to your point, people are used to clicking on the photo. And when you upload a post or a link to Facebook, that gives a photo that people click on and they go to the landing page. So what we learned was this piece of content was one long infographic, right, with multiple parts. So what we did was we chopped it up into different featured images. And we would share one image one week going to that post. And then the next week, we would change the featured image in the open graph, share that, but the landing page is still the post. So by using that user behavior, we were able to continuously build more traffic and clicks to that same post using different creatives by just simply changing out the open graph featured image and uploading that to Facebook over time, which gets into the next question. So Chris, you had mentioned the piles of content back in your publishing days versus great content. And a question that came through was also, Christoph, you had mentioned creating better content versus more content. And Josh would like to ask, how do you know what's better content versus more content? Or is there some kind of guide to follow and know what that is?
Christoph, do you want me to go first, or would you like to go first?
You can go.
All right. So first off, you do exactly what I do, is you go out and you ask people, right? The most important people for great content to be relevant to is your user, right? Get them involved. Make sure the content is focused on them. Not too long ago, there was an article published on Search Engine Journal where I spoke with Bob Evans, who was the former chief communications or chief content officer at Oracle. And Oracle went through an evolution where they changed their content publishing from just talking about really good technical stuff, and there was a place for that, but they spun their different groups together in a way that enabled them to talk really well and directly to and about what their audience was doing with their product and the end return on that product and how to get there. And it all really lives and dies with getting 2 to 3 to 4 steps closer to your audience, right? Not casting content to, but creating content in a way in which it gravitates to them.
Yeah, your audience decides whether or not it's good content, and I've kept preaching it's not your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's 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 boss, and every time I say that, somebody will scream at me and say, "Well, tell that to my boss." And that's really what it comes down to, right? Bosses and everybody who is living in this old system need to remember the actual audience. Is it, are they reading it? Is it at least, is it hitting them in the right point in the funnel? Is it, are you growing your audience, right? Because here's the thing, you cannot monetize an audience that you don't have, right? I mean, it's like common sense. So they decide whether it's working or not. And here's the other thing, to actually see if your content is good or not, you have to publish. And, I've done this, Lauren, you probably have similar stories from the front lines. Chris, you probably do too. I'm always surprised what content takes off and what content doesn't. I mean, I've been in meetings and we're like, this is really good, it should take off. And then it does nothing. And then there's other article that we thought was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, not really, all of a sudden takes off. So, but the only way you can figure that out is you have to hit the publish button. You can't just plan and plan and plan and never do and publish.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. And, I know also in the world of SEO right now, there's a lot of focus on consolidation of content. And consolidation of content can mean many things. It can mean, for example, you might have a cat litter company, and perhaps a couple of years ago, someone read that you have to be producing lots of content, so you wrote 20 pieces on the value of organic cat litter or how to get rid of cat smell or whatever it may be, and one of them on your site gets traffic and the rest gets nothing, right? But that 20 pieces could be merged together into one long form content that has lots of benefit. Or they may not be connected at all. They could be nested in a URL structure that gives depth to your site. Or they could be part one, part two, part three. And if you think about it, if you're reading a blog post as part one, part two, part three, that's not just a blog post. That could also be an email sequence. That could be something that's dropped into your funnel. That could be educational content that you drop in terms of ebooks or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So by kind of taking, it's like the end scene of The World According to Garp, right? You take your stack of sheets and you throw them out into the wind, see what you have, put them all together, and the next thing you know, you have all these chapters of content that aren't attached right now that could be used to tell a story down the road and get much more value out of that. So it's also kind of a dissecting what you have, what you already have under the hood, and getting more out of that.
That's where the SEO piece comes in, right? I mean, like I couldn't create content nearly a fraction as good as the kinds of content that Christoph does, but like I could look at what played well, didn't play well, what's topically aligned to other things, and help reorganize, reinvigorate, bring things forward, restructure. I mean, like you don't just publish it and leave it there. You publish it and you watch it and you manage it, right? I mean, two real world examples I have is I have a client who has some particular pieces of content that generate like hundreds and hundreds of links every year, like high value links, right? What this person does is they take that content in the existing URL format and 301 redirect it to other areas of the site, passing along that link equity to those new sections, but republishes an updated version of that existing content to a new URL, reshares it, and over the course of the year, regains a whole bunch of brand new links to that existing content that's just been fresh. So it's a cycle, it's a churn, it's a mechanism it's a flywheel. There's a whole lot of things come in, things grow, things move along, and you've got to look at it and nurture it. It's definitely not Ron Popeil, set it and forget it and not pay attention to it. You really have to, prune where you need to prune and allow to grow where you could allow to grow.
Right along those same lines, don't repeat yourself every year. So for example, I just came out of healthcare, and healthcare, like many other industries, has a lot of months, right? There's a cancer month and breast cancer month and heart month. So February, everybody shares an article on something heart related. Now, if you already shared one topic last year, don't write the same article again. And I actually think, Chris, this is a holdover from the newspaper world, right? Because the newspaper goes away, so we do the same thing every year. Take the last year's article, see what worked, see what didn't work, update it with anything new. And if there's nothing new, just re-promote it. Don't reinvent the wheel every 12 months. So something to think about, but I do see that happening still quite often, actually.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, it's a good point. You don't have to reinvent the content. You can reinvent part of the delivery service. So you might want to make that content more responsive this year, because maybe you're seeing an uptick in mobile visitors. Or maybe you heat map that and you see that people basically scroll over certain areas and check out others. Well, maybe they scroll it over. You don't need it. You replace it with something better. So those are all great points.
Totally. Even though my ask to everybody on here, please, if you're not responsive, don't wait for next year. Do it now. Get to responsive.
Absolutely. Next question comes from Caitlin McIntyre. She asks, is SEO most impactful if applied to blogs, or should it be involved with all content, white paper, webinars, ebooks, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm going to say all. I mean, why would it just be isolated to a blog, right? Using that mechanism SEO, if you're going to publish a white paper that needs to be downloaded from a landing page that's going to generate that where the registration is generated. Well, what other pages on your site rank well for things that could drive into that funnel? How might you then, like you said, change or augment or add call to actions to pages that already rank well and drive people to there, or set up internal link structures, or find pages that are supportive in some nature and canonical into, or if you have multi-page things, make sure you have your canonical pagination set up properly. There's a billion ways in which you could apply SEO tactics and strategies to a number of ways around all sorts of different things around your business, not just a blog itself.
Totally. And, also, what are the right terms that you will use? And I don't know if it was you, Chris, or who I had that discussion with, but I did a webinar, editorial planning. And guess what? How many people search for editorial planning? Hardly anybody. I don't know how I came up with that term. People search for editorial calendar. So guess what? My editorial planning webinar became how to set up your editorial calendar or something, because that's what people actually use other than me. And again, I'm not the target audience, right? So basic SEO research right there.
Excellent. Thank you. So next question comes from Matthews. Matthews asks, what are the key KPIs and key things to look at when you're differentiating content for B2B versus B2C? So from an SEO perspective, are there any specific KPIs that might be different? Then also from a content generation perspective, if you're writing for direct to consumer versus writing for people at work and decision makers in the places of work, are there any pieces of content that work better for one or the other?
Well, I mean, either one, you have to figure out what are their problems, right? So whether it's B2B or B2C, you have to answer what their problems are. And I think, Chris, you can chime in there, but on B2B, it seems to be usually a much longer cycle, right? B2B, sometimes people click, they buy, goodbye. So B2B sometimes is longer, but bottom line is you still have to figure out what is actually the problem you're trying to solve, and do you actually know the answer? Are you actually an expert on that topic for your potential buyer?
Yeah, and just to take this into consideration, all purchases are consumer driven, right? B2B, B2C, right? There are people behind choices. So if all day long I'm in the B2B world, I'm a person that goes out and exists and has a network socially and engages with it. I'm a consumer at some level in some way, right? You really need to think about it from a human standpoint, right? You're not, an office building is not making a purchase, right?
Right.
There are people that are making those purchases, right? And I think in the B2B space, you may have to appeal to different levels of people, because as we shown earlier, there's maybe 4, 5, 6 decision makers that might need to contribute to a thing. In a B2C, into a pure consumer cycle, you might have to create similar pieces of content or tonal value content across a number of different decision-making processes, right? So it's content made for one person, but consumed in the way in which that person needs it at where they are in that decision journey, as opposed to B2C, where you might have to create 4, 5, 6 versions of similar content for different people in the stack as to where they are as they're contributing to a decision process. Just my contribution there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get a little bit meta about this. Like, we're kind of doing this right now, right? So right now we're putting together an hour-long webinar / presentation that not everybody at the company really has the time to attend, right? But then we're going to take this webinar content and repurpose it into a slide deck. It's available on SlideShare, into a video. It's available on YouTube. We're going to transcribe it using rev.com and put together an in-depth article with all of the highlights from this webinar. It's available on SEJ. And then we're going to send it out via email to all of our subscribers. And I know from experience with most of the CEOs that I work with from a B2B perspective, they don't have time to sit down in a webinar. But if someone forwards them an email, right, that has a webinar recap, and they're like, hey, you got to check these guys out. They know what they're talking about. The guy, and they're gonna be like, yeah. So by taking the content from this webinar, right, that you're listening to right now, and putting it out there on the web to be found later, putting it on YouTube to be watched later, and put it in an email for it to be forwarded around, and to empower whoever is at that decision maker with the content that they like the most, right? That resonates with them the most, to be able to see and learn and trust. It's all there at the end of the day. And the key is really to bring it all back, right? To bring it all back to your link target or SEO target. So if we're doing a webinar to help boost if the SEO goal is to help boost with SEO tools, and we have an SEO tools landing page, then all of this should funnel back into that, helping you at the end of the day, not just from a linking perspective, but from a highly targeted traffic perspective and from an overall marketing perspective as well. So getting back into SEO, Reza Rad asks, when you talk about content and aligning with SEO, are you talking about keyword mapping and creating the content around keywords? Or is there something else that you're talking about in terms of crafting content around SEO?
So stepping in here, because it's just you start the question with SEO. You got to look at the history of how things came about. In the past, you used to just be able to take keywords and do things like, keyword frequency and, density, and if a page is supposed to be about a word and you write that word in the page enough times, chances are that page is going to rank and whatnot. Those days are long gone, right? I mean, there's still some stuff in there, but the intent of that is to turn into significantly less useful content to the user and really poor experience when you come from finding a piece of content in the search engine to the thing, right? To the end content. You still need to understand keywords, but you need to understand the grouping of keywords around a theme and what it means, right? What all of these keywords brought together are trying to achieve. It's not so much value on a specific word. I mean, although do I rank for this term is still an artifact of SEO and search, because it's a thing you can look at. But when you get into when you cross over into the content, the combination of terms and phrases, what does that convey, right? It's not so much it's not the word, it's the sum message of all those words brought together, right? And if you look at things like latent semantic indexing and stuff like that, it's the value of words together, or broken up across chunks of content and distances from each other, right? And how they're used in many different ways. It's not a specific one-word answer. It's the sum of the value of those terms brought together.
Mm-hmm. From a content creation perspective, I see two scenarios. One is, let's say you have a really good story you want to share. You heard customer feedback, something happened in the organization, whatever it might be, and this is a good story, right? So you will go and create content around it. But now you should partner with your SEO people and actually figure out what are the right terms. So the editorial calendar example I gave. Don't use editorial planning just because Christoph likes that term and nobody else uses it, right? Use the terminology that people use. And then on the other side of things, which is more SEO driven, is SEO strategists can help you determine what people are searching for that is not currently being covered. So I've been working with clients when we do some research and we say, hey, people are really searching for this topic, which is right up your alley. Nobody has written about it. And then if they get to market first, they can actually rank for that pretty quickly. So those are really the two entry points from my perspective and how that usually happens.
Excellent, excellent. And also tell editorial not to type in links, but to copy and paste them. Then you don't end up with a bunch of broken links down the road. I'd also like to give a shout out to Larry Bergman, who saying hi, Chris and Christoph. So I think you guys know Larry pretty well. He's in here just saying hi to everybody. Final question. Final question comes from Josh Fiorentino. Josh writes, and this kind of gets to what we were just talking about, Christoph. In terms of making content that your audience wants, how much of your content strategy is focused towards current audience versus the new audience you want to acquire? So do you ever split that up in terms of content that's targeted towards possibly customer retention or brand loyalty, and then content that's targeted towards bringing new people in? How is that typically split up from from a content strategy perspective?
Well, the right answer, as it is in digital marketing so many times from my perspective, is it always depends, right? Number one, how big is your audience already? How many customers do you have already? How similar are they? So maybe if you do have several personas, right, maybe you have to focus on one or the other. But the bottom line is, you do want to continue to grow your audience. And then the other thing, I'm glad somebody mentioned it, because people keep forgetting about, storytelling and content marketing is also about keeping current audience members, right? So if everybody just churns nonstop, that's not a very good experience either. And even a sign that something is not necessarily going too well. So I don't know if I have an answer what the percentage should be, but you do want to kind of think about how do they relate to each other, and of course, what are the new ways to get in front of those new audiences as well.
Right, and reflecting back on our slide about the life cycle, right? There's the life cycle to acquire an audience, a new customer, was much larger and much more expensive. It's way more expensive to find a new customer than it is to do your due diligence to keep your existing customer happy. And if your existing customer is unhappy, go figure out why and own up to it, and be empathetic and truthful. Fall on the sword where you have to. If there's been a problem, own that issue. And when customers see you're really into it to win it together, they're going to stay longer, right? And also, and a little bit more from just a pure SEO side, right? If you use a product mentality, right? Nobody today is buying black and white TVs, right? But if the internet was around when black and white, when black and white TVs was there's probably a lot of information around black and white TVs. So you're probably not publishing information about black and white TVs anymore, but take what you've created, the value that those pages have earned over time, roll them forward into your next product launch. For the longest time, it always, and I still see brands do this. Macy's for the longest time used to be like the 2001 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, the 2002, right? And every year you'd have this giant directory of 2001 / Thanksgiving Day Parade. Why don't I just call it Thanksgiving Day Parade? And every year continue to accumulate that value into one section. I think I remember one time Danny Sullivan writing about that. But you see brands do this. They're like, oh, my 2007 summer sale. Why don't you just call it summer sale? Because I guarantee you're going to have one in 2018. Make sense?
Awesome. That makes total sense. Same thing with Super Bowl, right? Super Bowl / 1983. Super Bowl / 2001. So perfect sense. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure hosting the two of you today on the SEJ Think Tank. Just to let everyone know, we're going to be sending out a video of the webinar along with the recap to your emails. And you're going to have the chance to follow up with the team over at Scruple Live as well. After the webinar is over, there's going to be a quick survey. So if you take the time to fill out the survey and let us know how we can do things better, that would be fantastic. Thanks again, Chris and Christoph. It's been a pleasure. Give you a chance to say bye to everybody. And thank you so much for attending our latest SEJ Marketing Think Tank with Scruple Live. Goodbye, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.